Welcome back to TC24. In this special episode, I, the curator of TC24, was a recent guest on Adam Ryan's In All Airness basketball history show. Adam has a fantastic series of podcasts focused on the Jordan era of the NBA. Several former NBA players, executives, sports writers, and influencers in the game have been previous guests on In All Airness. In this podcast, I'll talk about the TC24 channel, how I became a Tom Chambers fan, the work that I'm doing to better recognize Chambers' outstanding basketball career, and his worthiness for enshrinement in the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. Links to Adam Ryan and In All Airness can be found in the video description. I'd like to add that my channel is non-monetized. Nothing on that channel is monetized. I do it because I love doing it. It's never been about me. I never wanted to do this to make money or to get recognition for myself. It's all about my love of the game and sharing what I saw in my favorite player, who is Tom Chambers, and hoping I can move the needle just a bit by sharing what I saw in him as a player and just be an advocate for him to be in that conversation, because I think he deserves to be in that conversation as one of the game's greats and certainly as a candidate for the Hall of Fame.
And you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
We're all getting goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Strand, you made the pass, yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 128. Thanks for joining me. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Jeff Wells. Jeff is a Tom Chambers superfan. This is a super fun conversation about Jeff's excellent YouTube channel, TC24, devoted to showcasing Tom's fantastic career and advocating his worthiness for the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. You'll soon realise Jeff's importance in relation to Tom Chambers being named a first-time nominee and candidate for the Hoop Hall's class of 2022. Our conversation covers the origin story of Jeff's NBA fandom and the unique details behind his fascination with Tom Chambers. We talk about his YouTube channel and do a deep dive into the process behind the tremendous features that he produces. This episode is filled with information on Tom's journey from high school through to the NBA. You'll also hear some snippets of audio from Jeff's videos that demonstrate the care and precision he takes with each upload. It's a really fun and informative conversation. You can subscribe to Jeff's channel by searching TC24 on YouTube. Show notes for this episode and access to a huge archive of past episodes are available at inallairness.com. Now, on to the show. My guest today has an excellent fan-run YouTube channel devoted to the outstanding career of Tom Chambers. He aims to preserve Tom's indelible legacy and advocate for Chambers' entry into the Naismith Memorial Hall of Fame. Jeff Wells, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Adam. Thanks for having me on and taking an interest in my work on Tom Chambers.
You are most welcome. Your YouTube channel, which we'll talk about as this conversation unfolds, is fantastic and deserves many more subscribers than it already has. Before we even get to that, the Basketball Hall of Fame recently announced the list of eligible candidates for the class of 2022, including high-profile first-time nominee, the aforementioned Tom Chambers. What was your reaction to first hearing that news?
Oh, I was excited. It was something that I'd been working very hard for a number of years now. You may not know because we haven't chatted about this, but I was the person who nominated Tom Chambers for the Hall of Fame. This is something that I didn't think it was possible, but reaching out to the Hall of Fame and using my channel as credentials, they were happy to take my nomination. They were great to work with. They were open to allowing me to do a short write-up on Tom Chambers' career, offering some insights on him as a player and adding it to the portfolio that they put together for the committee. So I thought that was super cool.
Oh, that's fantastic. I had no idea.
I asked around a handful of individuals who were in the basketball or sports community how that nomination process works. And interestingly, it was Pete Croato who had written the piece on me for Fansided, who gave me some insight that I should use the credentials of my TC24 channel as a media credential and contact the Hall of Fame and try to get in touch with the right people there and see if I can go through with the nomination. So I followed that advice. I ended up making a few calls, didn't hear back, but I was persistent and eventually called and got to the right person and left a voicemail. And within a day, I got a call back, and that opened up the floodgates of communication. It was a pretty quick and seamless process. And I was really taken aback by how receptive they were to having me, a fan, nominate a former player to the Hall of Fame.
That is so good to hear. Pete is a future guest of the podcast. He wrote an excellent book. I have it on Audible that I'm listening to at the moment, which is called From Hang Time to Prime Time: Business, Entertainment, and the Birth of the Modern Day NBA. So yeah, look forward to having Pete on. And I did read that article that appeared in Fansided online, so I'll link to that in the show notes. Does Tom Chambers' family know that the fact that he has been nominated came about through your doing?
This was something that was entirely on my own initiative. And once it became confirmed that the nomination was accepted, that's when I messaged Tom to let him know that Basketball Hall of Fame had accepted my nomination for him. And I'm super, super excited about this. And he was too, obviously.
I know that you're in contact with one of his 7 children, Skylar. How did Skylar feel hearing this news?
I have had contact with Skylar and Tom, of course, but I keep the communications with both of them very professional and to the point. So I haven't had much interaction with either of them. I do know that Tom's colleague, Tom Leander, who is a co-host on their son's broadcast, local broadcast in Arizona, Tom Leander was aware because he reached out to me and had expressed excitement about this. For me as a fan, it's like a dream. It's so cool that I watched Tom Chambers play for a number of years as a professional player, the countless NBA games. He influenced me through his playing. He influenced me as a basketball player and as somebody I looked up to. And through the advent of the internet, here I am 25, 30 years later, I'm able to exert my influence as a fan and what I saw in him and make an impact. And I just think that that turn of events through technology is super cool.
It's great to hear you talk about this and the story behind it. We're of a similar age. You grew up in California as a fan of the LA Lakers. How did Tom Chambers then first appear on your radar, and what made you focus primarily on him in the decades that followed?
That's a good question. I did grow up in Los Angeles in the 1980s, and I was a teenager at the time, and I was tall for my age as well as athletic, and I took an interest in basketball, and this was the time of the prime time Showtime Lakers. They were in their heat of their rivalry with the 76ers and the Celtics. And I took a love of the Showtime Lakers. I watched as many games as I could get on the local Lakers channel here. So I got to see a lot of teams. I was a big time Magic Johnson, James Worthy, Kareem, Byron Scott, Kurt Rambis, big time fan of theirs. But I got to see a lot of the West Coast teams frequently because Lakers are in the Pacific Division, and one of the teams was the Seattle Supersonics. And I had noticed more in passing that the Supersonics had a super tall, athletic forward, Tom Chambers, and I was impressed with his dunking, his athleticism. He was a highly active player that could take the shot from the outside as far away as the three-pointer, but also was very quick on the drive and could score with either hand. And that was impressive to me, although I was rooting against him and the Sonics. That was kind of the early introduction to Chambers and when he came on my radar screen as a fan of the game. But what really solidified that was a chance turn of events. The local Los Angeles Lakers radio station, KLAC 570 AM, which broadcasted all the Lakers games, occasionally had a fan trivia question. So it would be broadcast when, say, the game went to intermission. If you called in and got through with the correct answer, you would win Lakers tickets. So there was some trivia question that came on. I picked up the phone, called in. They took my call. I answered the question correctly, and I was sent 2 tickets to see the Los Angeles Lakers play the Seattle Supersonics. And my dad took me to that game. It's one of these things that you look back on, it's almost like the roads were leading to this, but I saw Tom Chambers play in person, and I was just really impressed. Threw down a monster 2-hand dunk in the game, was shooting from the outside, driving for left and right, giving the Lakers a hard time. I said to myself, this guy is really good. That's the kind of player I'd want to be. I could see myself in him a bit. And that was really where he started to become my favorite player. The guy that I followed the most was that game and that chance event of winning those tickets.
Incredible. Do you actually remember what the trivia question was, or am I testing your memory banks too much?
You might be testing my memory banks, but this is 35 plus years ago. As a teenager, it was super cool to have my name announced on the radio, but it led me to become a lifelong fan of an opposing player. That's led me on this journey to have this conversation with you today. It's almost like a butterfly effect where some small chance event can have significant repercussions down the road.
Tremendous to hear. Had you been to many Lakers games ahead of winning the tickets to attend the Lakers Sonics contest?
That was the first Lakers game I ever attended in person.
Oh, wow. Recording NBA games on videotape back in the 1980s and 90s, we had very limited access to NBA on TV here in Australia, but anything that did appear from probably 1989 onwards, I recorded everything I can get my hands on and kept it to this day. Most of my recordings are with a great friend of mine, Todd, who is in Melbourne. What's your history there, Jeff?
Well, I also did the VHS recording of the games and would watch them again and again later and watch highlights of them to see my favorite player or my favorite plays from the game. So I amassed a small collection of VHS tapes, and some over the years they get accidentally recorded over, but I still preserved enough, which gave me a collection that I would eventually bring to bear on the channel. But while we're on this subject of recording VHS games, some of the games that are on the channel were from my own collection that I had them digitally transferred, but I would have to say that the one tape that stands out more than any other in my entire collection was the 1987 NBA All-Star game, where, of course, Tom Chambers was the MVP of the game. I recorded that game in its entirety and have that tape well preserved, and it's a tape I have cherished and have watched countless times over the years. The 1987 All-Star game, which I recently uploaded to my channel in its entirety, is a direct copy from that original master tape. It was an era that I don't think today's generation broadcast on TV, and if you wanted to see it again, you had to have a VCR player and a tape ready to go and then save it.
Now, that 1987 NBA All-Star game, it was held on February the 8th, and it was at Seattle's Kingdome, of all places. Now, Tom had 34 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, and 4 steals in just 29 minutes of action. And the West held on for a 154-149 victory in overtime. He was named the All-Star Game MVP. It was an incredible performance, especially given the fact that Tom was named as Ralph Sampson's replacement.
Now the starting lineup for the Western Conference. Selected to start by the fans, but unable to be here today due to injury, the Houston Rockets' Ralph Sampson. Starting in his place and making his first All-Star appearance, the versatile forward from the hometown Seattle Supersonics, Tom Chambers.
It was a game that I think really was made for players like Tom. His style was run and gun. And in an all-star game, it does tend to be an up-tempo game, The defense is generally lighter, and I do have a copy of a Sonics game. I think it was the Sonics versus the Nets. And this was maybe a month or so out from the 1987 All-Star game. And the broadcasters for that game were commenting on Tom being a All-Star candidate, remarking that the game was made for players like Tom Chambers. I agree with that assessment. But what I think really enabled Tom Chambers to have such a strong All-Star game was his pairing with Magic Johnson. We saw just how difficult it was for the East to match up with Tom and Magic when they did the pick and rolls and when Magic was feeding Tom on the break. We saw more of that with Tom Chambers and Kevin Johnson in Phoenix and how effective that was. But to do that in an All-Star game, the East had little answer for that. It was something that, for me as a fan, was extremely exciting to watch. To this day, that game remains my favorite game of all time. When that game was over, I felt like I just got off a roller coaster ride.
Tom, you can pick up the trophy if you want. It's yours. Did you ever think in your wildest dreams that this would happen in your home city?
I never ever thought it would happen. This is something that you dream about and dreams are made of, and I can't believe it happened to me. I'm just so grateful today. It's super. I appreciate this opportunity, and I'm glad Rolando hit those free throws.
Well deserved. Congratulations.
How did it feel to watch your favorite player prior to Tom Chambers, Magic Johnson, and Tom Chambers playing together on the same team?
Oh, super exciting. I was a huge fan of Magic at the time as well. So to see those two pair up was a dream come true. And obviously it's an all-star game, so the attention on this was so much greater. And it made me wonder over the years how Tom Chambers' career could have played out if he teamed with Magic Johnson in the Lakers system, maybe earlier on in his career. That was one of those games that can trigger those what-if thoughts.
It's a mouth-watering proposition. Another one of the interesting videos that you've uploaded on your channel is from 1987. It's the second Midsummer Night's Magic All-Star event held at the Great Western Forum in LA. How did you obtain that particular game? It's fantastic quality. The footage is excellent. 2.5 hours in length.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, live from the fabulous forum, the stars of the NBA return as Prime Ticket presents A Midsummer Night's Magic #2.
That's a game I had been searching for a number of years, and through the network of fellow fans, I was able to discover someone who had it in their collection, and I was able to obtain a really nice, clean digital copy of it. That's a game that had a rare appearance of Tom Chambers in a summer pro exhibition game. Generally, he did not participate in those. This is coming off of his 87 All-Star Game MVP, and of course the connection with Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson apparently reached out to Tom Chambers to invite him to play, and Tom accepted. Such a fun game. It's a fantastic game to watch. It's high scoring. It's less defense than a regular All-Star game. The players are having fun, and it was super cool to see Bill Russell be the coach of Tom's blue team. It was Elgin Baylor, who is the coach of Magic Johnson's white team. And to see those players interacting, it's so much fun to see that as a fan. Unusual combinations as well. So there was a couple instances in that game where there was a fast break and you've got Dominique running one wing and Tom running the other wing. One can only wonder what it would have been like to have Isaiah. Isaiah was the point guard in that game, and those two pair on a regular basis.
That would have been incredible. What makes it so great is when particularly some of the rarer videos that you've been sharing on your channel start to appear. You see things that, unless you were actually there at the game, they've barely ever been seen again. And that's what's so important about the fact that you have this channel set up and obviously advocating for Tom Chambers to get into the Hall of Fame. So it's fantastic stuff that you're doing.
Thank you. I do have a number of tapes in my collection that probably have not been seen since their original broadcast. Well, being in Los Angeles, we have 2 basketball teams, so I was able to get games recorded playing against either the Sonics or the Suns via the LA Lakers and the LA Clippers, so that was an advantage for me. but I did not have cable television during the 1980s, so I was limited to broadcast games only. Going back to what you say, it allowed for me to really appreciate the times that I did have a game on TV to record it and save it and appreciate it for what it was, rather than having, say, today's internet where I can instantaneously watch a number of games or highlights at a few strokes of the keyboard. It just was something that I cherished more and appreciated more over the years.
How did you go about obtaining some of the footage that you have, particularly like cable TV telecasts of the 1980s? If you didn't have access to cable, were you relying on mail tape trading like I used to do back in the 1990s, sending videos and eventually DVDs anywhere across the world with other collectors?
Yes, that was primarily the route that I took once it became apparent that there were others who had VHS games that had transferred them either to a DVD or some digital medium and could trade them. So I obviously had a collection of games that had not been in the trade community, if you want to call it that. So it enabled me to acquire games and for other traders to acquire games from my collection. I've even ordered games as far away as Australia and Europe from both traders, as well as a company called Pontel out of Europe. They have a lot of classic games that they're authorized to distribute, so I've ordered games through Pontel. My best suppliers have tended to come from Serbia. There's some just fanatical NBA fans and collectors there, and I've been able to expand my game collection over the years, and through that acquired some rare games, some very rare material as well.
Your YouTube channel began, according to the stats here I'm looking at on YouTube, in August of 2006. And the video that you have that has got the most views, which is closing in on almost 2 million, incredibly, is of Tom's arguably most famous dunk, his incredible GM over Mark Jackson when Tom was a member of the Phoenix Suns. Did that sort of give you the idea that it might be worth using your YouTube channel to be more of a advocacy for Chambers to get into the Hall of Fame?
Well, the channel was started, I don't think YouTube was not even a year old when that first handful of videos went up, and I didn't even know video editing back then. I took a few of my VHS tapes over to a buddy of mine's house, and he did video editing. I just asked him, hey, can you copy a few clips from these VHS tapes and convert them to digital and upload them to YouTube? So he obligingly did the work for me and put them up on YouTube. I didn't think much of it. YouTube was still a novelty at the time, but I noticed within a few days that video of Tom Chambers dunking over Mark Jackson had already received a few thousand views. And that was like, wow, okay, this is pretty cool. I'm sharing something of my favorite player and other people are seeing it. And it got me excited. But my roadblock from doing more back then is that I knew nothing about video editing, nothing. All those game clips that were put up on the channel from about 2006, maybe to 2008, there's just a handful, was all through a friend of mine who knew video editing. And things changed. I kind of lost interest in putting things up there. I was heavily involved with my career work and things like that. I knew in the back of my mind, one day I would come back to this. One day I was going to come back to this and do something with it. All these years had gone by from about 2008, 2009. I think it was early 2018. It was the 2018 Hall of Fame nominees. I think I was reading them online somewhere, maybe NBA.com. And I immediately scanned it to see if Tom Chambers had been nominated. I was at a point in my life in 2018 where I was working less hours. I had a lot more free time. I was in a transition to find something new, some other talent I can add to my resume and my abilities. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is the perfect opportunity. I always said to myself, I would come back to this channel and make an ultimate highlight reel of Tom Chambers. Now is the time to do it. Let's pull the trigger. So I started learning how to, on my own, first playing around with iMovie on my laptop. The iMovie for Apple comes with the Apple laptops. I started tooling around with it, just playing around and making some simple videos. I felt like this is something I can competently do. So I decided to buy the Final Cut Pro FCPX and made a test video out of it to get familiar, but I started taking online classes for it. And there's a lot of free tutorials on YouTube. So I started watching those and learning different aspects of how to put a video together and how to manage digital content. And that really started the ball rolling. And my first product of about 3 months of dedicated work was the Tom Chambers for Hall of Fame video, which came out in June of 2018. That was the first video I ever put together. It was probably 100 hours of work, but it was 100 hours of work and just learning trial by fire. I'm learning how to do it. I made mistakes and tried to do it better. And I tried to copy digital content, and I acquired a couple more rare clips from some other individuals that had some rare games and put that together. And that got the ball rolling for me. I felt like I was coming back to my original commitment to myself that I would revisit this. It motivated me to do it further.
That is great. Now, is that the one that's titled Tom Chambers for Hall of Fame? Then it says NBA Career Retrospective, new?
Yes. That was the first video I ever produced using FCPX and the video editing skills that I was learning at the time. I did not know at that time that this would lead to subsequent videos. This was more, I wanted to accomplish a goal of learning how to do video editing. Here is a subject that I really enjoy, and here's something I can see if it moves the needle a bit. And so I put that together and released it.
As we record this, it says 3 years ago. So got in excess of 25,000 views. And prior to that, your previous video appeared to have been 13 years ago. In terms of your recent history, putting the highlights together, doing your voiceovers, and I must add that your voice is silky smooth. It's fantastic to hear on the clips you upload. What process is involved from start to finish in terms of getting together one of these clips that feature Tom at different stages of his career?
Well, thank you. I've been self-conscious about my voice. We're each born with our own unique voice, and here I was trying to produce more videos and introducing my voice into the videos. And I was concerned that it would not work. It would not sound right. And even to me, when I hear the playbacks, I thought, it just doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like a newscaster's voice. But to hear your feedback on that, and I've gotten feedback from others as well, made me feel much more comfortable with adopting more vocals into these videos. But in terms of my work process, what I do is I initially come up with a concept for a video. And it's usually something that strikes me on my mind. Where do I need to take the channel next? What other aspect of Tom's career should I explore? And do I have available assets or material to work with? Once I commit myself to whatever that concept is, I start bullet pointing, what do I need to have to make this video work? I write it out and how I want to tell the story. As things materialize and I'm able to acquire the assets and put them into the editing suite, I begin writing out some script to help me stay on track with the story. This helps me to distill a more complex idea into a video that's only going to be 7 or 8 minutes and narrow it down to information that will be useful to the fan as well as entertaining. And then when I go for the actual record, I try to find a very quiet area. I seal off a room. I have a huge monitor and I put the script up on the monitor. I have the video in FCPX on one side of the screen, the script on the other, and I press play and I just do them in segments. And then if I don't like it, I just re-record it. It doesn't take that long. A 10-minute video could take me maybe an hour to record. And that's just being patient with setting it up, playing it back, listening. And if I don't like it, re-record it. That's generally the process.
Fascinating, really is. Now, one of your videos on your channel is titled Tom Chambers, The High School Years, and this was about 1 year ago. Tom went to Fairview High School in Boulder, Colorado. What can you tell us about Tom's high school days and perhaps even putting that video together and obtaining footage which appears in that clip?
NBA legends. Their rises to stardom began in their high school years. early glimpses of the superstars that they would become. From their triumphs to setbacks, each made a different journey from obscurity to national recognition. Their stories are worth telling. This is Tom Chambers' story. This was probably my favorite video to put together because it was so green fields in terms of there was nothing available online about his high school career. There had been no write-ups of any length about his high school career. I could not find photos of him in high school. So this was a challenge I put to myself to see how much research I can bring to bear to acquire these materials. Using just various resources that I have at my disposal, as well as a good mind for investigating, I was able to come up with some high school photos. I was able to acquire newspaper clippings. But what really put that video over the edge was I found the son of Tom's former high school coach, whose name is Tom McCracken, who was the head basketball coach at Fairview High School. His son was on Facebook. And I reached out and messaged his son on Facebook, introducing myself and my channel, and if there was any way I could be put in touch with Coach Tom McCracken. And his son responded to me very, very quickly and was very friendly and put me in touch with Coach Tom McCracken. I called Coach McCracken and he answered and was super excited to be able to talk about Tom Chambers and the teams that he coached at Fairview High School in the 1970s. So that really cracked it open. Coach McCracken also sent me several photos, even some old video that I could use for the production of this video in Tom Chambers' high school career. I returned all that to him, but he was extremely gracious and generous to allow me to use it and make copies of it for my work. But that was an exciting video. I do want to correct one thing. Tom Chambers played at Fairview High School in Boulder for his senior season only. He actually went to 3 high schools, which is very unusual. So given that he became an all-star player in the NBA and attended 3 different high schools, that's an unusual trajectory for an elite basketball player to take, for anyone.
That really is. I'm glad you corrected me there. Thank you, because I relied on basketballreference.com for the information. It just listed, obviously, his most recent high school that he attended, which was Fairview. Were the other 2 schools also in Colorado?
Yes. So the high school he attended for his junior year was in Aurora, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver. And the high school that he attended for his sophomore year was Weber High School in Weber, Utah, which was not far from where Tom grew up. So each year of his 3 years of high school, he was at a different school.
What were the actual years that he did attend high school? Do you have those handy?
He attended high school Fairview from 1976 to 77. Aurora High School was 75, 76. I believe it was Weber High School in 74, 75.
Great to have that clarification. Thank you for that.
I'm just quoting from memory here.
In terms of his college career, he would go on to play for the Utah Utes, and in 3 of his 4 collegiate seasons, Tom's Utes made the NCAA tournament. In his freshman and senior seasons, they lost in the regional semifinals, and then Tom left college with averages of almost 15 points and just under 8 rebounds per game. Tom led the Utes in scoring from his sophomore through senior seasons, and he also led the team in rebounding as a junior and a senior at almost 9 boards per game. Chambers is a member of the Utes All-Century team that was unveiled in 2008, which celebrated Utah's 100th season of men's intercollegiate hoops. Tom scored 1,698 points for Utah, and he's currently 9th all-time, as we record this, in career scoring and 10th overall in total rebounds for the Utes. There's another video of yours on the YouTube channel, which is titled Tom Chambers, the Utah Utes Years. It's almost 11 minutes worth. There's some tremendous footage in here of Tom on and off the court. What was the process behind getting some of the great footage that you got there, Jeff?
College basketball, the next big step the legends of the game had to climb. A stage that separates the men from the boys, with their dramatic stories of exhilarating highs and crushing lows. This is Tom Chambers' story. That was another video I really enjoy putting together. Like I said, I like videos that cover an aspect of a player's career which is not widely known and not widely available. I already had a game of his Utah Utes years. It was Utah versus North Carolina in the 1981 NCAAs. I had that game in my collection, so that was some material that I had ready there. But I also had some newspaper clippings, and most of them were in digital format. That was the groundwork for me to do some research, reading the newspaper clippings, going online to see what other materials are there. And the University of Utah has a number of basketball videos available on YouTube. But it was through the school's library and their archives that I was able to obtain the footage from many games during Tom Chambers' career there at the University of Utah that were later used in the video. Those were all digitized off of original film, so I was able to use the digital version of these highlight reels in my video. Looking back at his collegiate career, it's interesting to note that Tom Chambers, as great as he was at the University of Utah, was still a bit overshadowed by his teammate Danny Vrains. And Danny Vrains was an exceptional player. He was one of the best high school players in the nation, in the same class that Tom was. Vrains went to school, I believe it was at Skyline High School in the Salt Lake City area, a 5-star recruit. He was a player that was made for the college game. Tom and Danny were a formidable twosome on that team, both sharing time at the forward spots. Tom could also play center as well. But Tom Chambers was a bit overshadowed by Danny during his collegiate years, which is interesting to note because that role reversed once the two of them were drafted into the NBA. But going back to University of Utah, given all that Tom had accomplished in his 4 years there, I was really disappointed to learn that his jersey is not hanging in Huntsman Center, given where he stands in the all-time list of Utes greats. And as you mentioned, his stats at the University of Utah, he's still in the top 10 all-time in scoring, top 10 all-time in rebounding, and that's a program that's had basketball team for over 100 years. So this is something that I wanted to do to draw attention to that deficit of recognition, and hopefully this video will spur some interest in Tom receiving more recognition for what he accomplished at the University of Utah.
This is Future Adam. A quick update. Since our conversation was recorded, I am very pleased to announce that Tom Chambers will have his jersey retired by the University of Utah. It was announced on January the 6th of 2022. He will be honoured in Utah on February the 5th. Here's a quote from Utah Athletic Director Mark Harlan. In the tremendous history of the Utah men's basketball program, Tom Chambers holds a special place for the accomplishments he achieved both as a member of the program and throughout his all-star career in the NBA. He has brought distinction and positive recognition to the University of Utah by leading his team to 2 NCAA tournaments and achieving 4 NBA All-Star appearances over the course of his 16-year professional career. We are excited to have Tom and his family join us in the Huntsman Center to commemorate his incredible achievements by displaying his jersey among the greats in Utah men's basketball history. Congratulations, Tom. Fantastic to have this honor bestowed upon you, and wishing you all the best as the year progresses. That's actually me, Future Adam, saying that last part to Tom. Okay, back to the original conversation.
It's beautifully put together. It's a really great watch, and it clocks in at just under 11 minutes. Now, you mentioned Danny Vrains there. I actually noticed when I was looking at the Utah Utes record books earlier today that Danny's actually the spot above Tom in terms of all-time career scoring by, I think, only 3 single points. He scored 1,701 career points to Tom's 1,698. So definitely their paths intertwined remarkably throughout their 4 seasons with the Utes.
They did. They really complemented each other on that team. And interestingly enough, they would become teammates again with the Seattle Supersonics for a good couple of years, where Tom was more the star on that team. And Danny was a really good, aggressive offensive rebounder. He was a good defender. I think he was underutilized in the Sonics system as an offensive weapon. But to see those two paired together again in the NBA was really fun and exciting to see.
The San Diego Clippers selected Tom Chambers with the 8th overall pick in the 1981 NBA draft. That draft class included all-stars such as Mark Aguirre, Danny Ainge, Rolando Blackman, Steve Johnson, Larry Nance, Isaiah Thomas, Kelly Tripucka, and Buck Williams. As we record this, Isaiah Thomas is the only Hall of Famer from that draft class. Hopefully that will change very soon. Tom only missed 4 games with his 2 seasons that he played in San Diego. He averaged almost 18 points, 7 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. And he was named the NBA Rookie of the Month in January of 1982.
He was actually named to the NBA All-Rookie team, but as an honorable mention. And I think he would have made that team officially had, say, for example, Bill Walton been healthy that season, because that San Diego Clippers team was being tooled around Bill Walton. And what they needed was a power forward and a scoring forward, which is why they chose Tom Chambers for that. And as backup to Walton, because Chambers was one of those unique players who could play the 3, the 4, and the 5. Chambers was meant to be a building piece around Bill Walton, but Bill Walton was injured for all of Chambers' rookie season and a good chunk of Chambers' second season with the Clippers. Had the Clippers had that nucleus together and won some more games and maybe even scooted into the playoffs, I think that would have set a different career trajectory for Tom in terms of his recognition in the NBA and in terms of his player profile.
That's a great point, because their record certainly worked against them. In his rookie season, the Clippers went 17-65, and in his second season, they improved a little bit, 25-57 under coach Paul Silas. But you're right, I definitely think that would have impacted his standing amongst the up-and-comers in the league had they won a few more games and obviously had the great Bill Walton even close to 80-90% healthy. It was in August of 1983 that the Clippers traded Tom to the Seattle Supersonics. In his 5 years with the Sonics, Tom only missed 17 regular season games, and 16 of those were in the 1986 campaign. He averaged 20.4 points, 6.6 rebounds, 2.4 assists, and almost 1 steal per game in his tenure with Seattle. And 1987 would be the highest scoring season of his career to that point. He also famously won the NBA All-Star Game MVP honors, as we talked about. What would you like to elaborate on there in terms of Tom's reign in Seattle? No pun intended.
His reign in Seattle was an interesting one. He was brought in to add youth and a scoring punch. The Seattle Supersonics at that time were obviously facing the Los Angeles Lakers as a dominant team in the Pacific Division. Their nucleus was starting to age just a bit. You had Sigma holding down center. He was still in his prime. But you had Gus Williams, who was starting to age a bit. Freddie Brown, same thing. They were just past prime, and they needed to bring in some youth. Chambers didn't really fit very well into the system at first under Coach Wilkins, who tended to play a little bit more of a half-court game, and Chambers really his natural inclination is run and gun. So I think he felt perhaps a little bit constrained and a little frustrated in that system. But it wasn't until Bernie Bickerstaff came in as head coach that things really started to change for Tom, because Bernie Bickerstaff did implement a more up-tempo run-and-gun game. They've drafted Xavier McDaniel, who also is a highly athletic forward, traded for Dale Ellis, who was a terrific outside shooter and really one of the great early three-point shooting stars. And that really opened up Chambers' game. It was a tantalizing look at what he can be in the right system. That 4 or 5 year evolution at Seattle was an interesting and exciting time, but I think it was that 86-87 season where Tom Chambers really started to blossom.
The Sonics advanced to the Western Conference Finals in 1987 before getting swept by the would-be NBA champs, the LA Lakers. But prior to that, they went through Dallas in the first round and defeated Houston in 6 games in the Western Conference semifinals. Just briefly chatting about the 1984 season, Tom's first in Seattle. They made the postseason for his first playoff appearances. And in that series against Dallas in 1984, there was a classic Game 5. Unfortunately, Seattle were on the wrong side of the final score. It was called Moody Madness. Does that ring a bell to you?
It does, and it was such a heartbreaker of a game because it did come down to that Game 5, and it came down to the last minute, and the Sonics unfortunately made a couple errors, and it went Dallas's way. What ended up happening for the Sonics is after that loss, they didn't make the playoffs again until 86-87. So it set in motion a couple of rough years, but sometimes to achieve greatness, you've got to overcome adversity and struggle and persevere through it. Tom, you mentioned earlier, in 86, missed 16 games. He had broken his leg. He had a fractured leg at that point. So he really, really suffered some adversity. But in 86, 87, and this is something I did mention before, Tom Chambers was the first player standing 6'10" or taller to average 1 3-point attempt per game for an entire season. He did that in 86, 87, and he connected on a respectable 37% of those, which even today for a big man, someone standing 6'10" or taller, is still considered a respectable percentage. But that was 35 years ago.
It does put it in perspective, doesn't it? But you're right, he's had a very nice outside shooting touch.
All of this was a glimpse of the player that he could become in the right system. In 87, 88, the following year, Xavier McDaniel was named to the All-Star team instead of Tom Chambers, and I think the Sonics were struggling how to manage 3 20-point-plus scorers on that team. They brought in Derek McKee as a rookie. They got Olden Polynice. They were building a team that seemed to be moving in a direction that was less towards Tom's strengths. In 87, 88, his minutes went down a bit. His scoring average went down a bit. It almost seemed like this was a direction that was not going to play to Chambers' strength anymore. So it was just that window of 86, 87, which was really his blossoming, a glimpse of what we would see when he moved to Phoenix.
Speaking of that move to Phoenix, it was July of 1988, and he signed with the Suns as the first ever unrestricted free agent. And I recently released a podcast episode with the godfather of Arizona sports, the great Jerry Colangelo. And he did discuss how he built that late 1980s Phoenix roster, and particularly the addition of Tom Chambers to Phoenix. That was episode 127. I'm never above shameless self-promotion. As a member of the Suns, Tom was an All-Star in 1989, 1990, and 1991. He was also named to the All-NBA second team in 1989 and 90. And in Phoenix, he averaged almost 21 points, 7 rebounds, and over 2 assists per game. His scoring would ultimately blossom, and he'd have one of the most outstanding performances of his career, a 60-point game, which we'll get to in a moment. But just generally, looking back on Tom's career in Phoenix, what do you make of that, Jeff?
I remember when that happened. It was July of 88, and I had heard about this new unrestricted free agent ability of players to switch teams. And Tom Chambers was the very first unrestricted free agent signing in NBA history. The Phoenix Suns were in a process of rebuilding after being hit with injuries and a drug scandal that involved some players on the team. And they were trying to completely rebuild the team and hit the refresh button on the team. They started putting pieces together late in the 87-88 season. They brought in Kevin Johnson and Tyrone Corbin and Mark West from Cleveland in exchange for Larry Nance, who was the Suns' young star player. And they needed another veteran player to come in and provide stability for the Suns. And they looked towards Tom Chambers. He fit the bill completely in terms of what they were looking for, and a player that was eligible for the unrestricted free agent position. So when Tom came in, it was clear that this was going to be a run and gun team with types of players that Phoenix was building with. They brought in Eddie Johnson as well, who was a great spot up shooter. They had a system in place that would take Tom Chambers and really exploit his abilities. So what we saw in 86, 87 with the Sonics would be taken to a whole new level with the Suns. And that's what we saw. It was the greatest single-season turnaround in NBA history at that time, the 88-89 season for the Suns.
So much fun to watch that Phoenix team. Tom was the fourth leading scorer in the NBA in 1990. He averaged 27.2 points per game, and that only trailed Michael Jordan, Karl Malone, and Patrick Ewing. So a fantastic offensive output from Tom. That same season, March 24 of 1990 to be precise, Tom exploded for 60 points in a game against his former team, the visiting Seattle Supersonics. And in 42 minutes, Tom registered 60 points on 22 of 32 from the field. He also had 6 boards, 4 assists, 1 steal and 2 blocks, and he went 16 of 18 from the free throw line. For context, Kenny Battle was the Suns' next highest scorer with 15 points, and Phoenix demolished Seattle 121-95. You uploaded that particular game. It's titled Tom Chambers' 60-point game, full game in high quality, about 1 year ago. And it has over 4,000 views. It deserves a lot more, and hopefully in time it will. But how did you go about sourcing that particular contest, and what do you recall from that fantastic game where Tom just went berserk?
On March 24, 1990, Tom Chambers scored a career-high 60 points against his former team, the Seattle Supersonics, becoming just the 14th player in NBA history to score 60 or more points in a game. This scoring feat was accomplished without making a single three-point shot or requiring an overtime period. Chambers' offensive arsenal was on full display, and he shot an incredible 22 for 32 from the field. And in honor of the 30th anniversary of this game, we bring you its complete original broadcast, including a rare post-game interview with Chambers following the game. So please enjoy this rare moment of greatness in NBA history. The beauty of having this channel is that the fans that do decide to subscribe to the channel and appreciate what I'm doing on the channel often will email me, and they may have some material that they were interested in trading or allowing me to use for the channel because they're Tom Chambers fans too. So to make a long story short, I've been able to expand my collection with some very rare material through fans finding the channel and then reaching out to me. That's enabled me to collect some of these really, really special and rare games. So that's how the 60-point game and some of these other rare games I'm posting came about into my collection, was through the following I'm getting on the channel. Really dedicated Tom Chambers fans. And some of them have their games still on VHS tape. So I've got to do the work of getting them digitized. It's something I love to do, but to answer that question, the channel is now becoming its own entity in terms of allowing me to expand the content I have on it. In terms of that game, I did not see that game broadcast live, but the following day, it was a headline in the sports section of the local paper here in Los Angeles. I was pumped up when I saw that. I was really excited. I'm having breakfast and saw that headline. It was just unbelievable. I read it a second time to see that I actually read it right. And I cut out that clipping, and it's still here in my collection, that original newspaper clipping. When that happened, it put everything that I really enjoyed about Tom and what I saw in his game, it just put it into the stratosphere. At that point, I realized he had reached his full potential. He was there. He was among the NBA elite. That stat line you mentioned a moment ago really does show that he had a complete game. He wasn't just a scorer. He is a really underrated passer. I've now seen hundreds and hundreds of games of Tom Chambers, and he is a good passer, but he has got a scorer's mind. He had a complete game and helped his team to win. I think the beauty of that game also is that it was against his former team, whom I think he felt at the time didn't do enough to retain him. It was a way of showing them, look, I'm in a better position now with the Phoenix Suns.
If my stats are correct, per basketballreference.com, there have been 76 60-point regular season games in NBA history. And for context, 32 of those occasions are courtesy of the iconic Wilt Chamberlain. It puts into perspective there how great of an achievement that is to register 60 or more points in a regular season game. In late June of 1993, the Suns released Chambers, not long after the 1993 NBA Finals wrapped up, where the Bulls held on to win that series in 6 games. He'd signed with the Utah Jazz in August, and Tom would come off the bench in all but 4 games with Utah, and he averaged 8.7 points and 3.3 rebounds in his 2 seasons with the Jazz. What do you make of his return back to Utah, his impact there? And we'll get to one of the great videos you've uploaded in a moment, footage of Tom's 20,000th point in the NBA.
Tom signing with Utah was going to be a great fit for him. He was returning home. He is a Utah native. He did go to high school in Colorado, but he was born and raised in Utah. He went obviously to the University of Utah. So coming to play for the Jazz was a perfect way for him to continue his career. And I think based on what I had read and heard, that's where he wanted to finish out his career, was with the Utah Jazz. He was going to give the Jazz some bench scoring punch, and the Jazz felt that Tom was going to be a key piece to make them a serious title contender. The Jazz went on those 2 years to have really, really good season records, but they came up against the Houston juggernaut. The 2 years that the Houston Rockets went to the NBA Finals were those 2 years that Tom was with the Jazz. But Utah had a phenomenal team, and it was really exciting to see him playing in front of a fan base that really appreciated him too and what he was doing this stage in his career. I did put out a video about his Utah Jazz years, and it includes some very rare clips of his time with the Jazz, as well as a couple of clips of Tom speaking about his time with the Jazz as well.
The video is called Tom Chambers, The Utah Jazz Years. It's almost 8 minutes in length. The clip I referred to earlier was Utah versus the Clippers. It was from the 15th of April of 1995, and it's Tom Chambers scoring his 20,000th point. And it's fantastic to see him rack up that milestone.
Chambers, he's got it! Congratulations, Tommy C.
I'm very happy for Tommy. It's a great honor. 4-time All-Star.
I believe he's only one of 2 players who scored 20,000 or more points who are yet to be inducted into the Hall of Fame.
That's correct. He was one of 3 going into this current NBA season, but Joe Johnson came out of retirement. Joe Johnson was one of the other 3 that was not in the Hall of Fame, has a 20,000 point career and was eligible, but he ended up signing with the Celtics. So now it's just Tom Chambers and Anton Jamison, who are the only former players eligible for the Hall of Fame who have had 20,000 point careers. But I will add to that, in defense of Tom Chambers, that Tom Chambers also is the only player in history of the game to have 20,000 points and a 60-point game and an All-Star MVP and not be in the Hall of Fame. And I do want to add, going back to that 60-point game, that Tom Chambers was only the 14th player in NBA to score 60 or more points in a game. And by that time, the NBA was well over 50 seasons old. So he was in an elite group of players to do that. And furthermore, Tom Chambers is one of only 4 players in the entire decade of the 1990s to have a 60-point game, the other 3 being Michael Jordan, David Robinson, and Karl Malone. And that 60-point was no freak game. That game was a follow-up to a 56-point game that he had against the Golden State Warriors a month earlier. So this was just no one and done explosion and never come close again. He really was a fantastic scorer and had multiple 40-point plus games that season.
He did, and your channel is definitely worth searching through as well, because I believe that 56-point game is also one that you've shared recently on your channel.
Yes, I recently acquired a large collection of VHS tapes, and for fans of my channel, I will be working at digitizing those. It's slow work right now because I can only do this on my free time, but there's going to be a lot of very rare and exciting games that are going to get posted over the course of 2022.
Now, in 1996, Tom journeyed to Israel. There's a video on your channel called Tom Chambers, Tel Aviv 1996 champion. It's almost 6 minutes in length. What can you tell us about Tom's journey overseas and how he performed there? Obviously, the title does give away what he achieved.
Yeah, this is a lesser known aspect of his career. Most NBA fans would not know that Tom Chambers played overseas for a season. He signed with Maccabi Tel Aviv, which is the premier team in Israel's professional basketball league and is a member of the Euro League of teams. So it's definitely a premier team in Europe.
Today, we're going to take a look at one of the most unusual seasons in Chambers' pro career. In 1995, after 14 seasons in the NBA and having surpassed 20,000 points while playing for the Utah Jazz, 36-year-old Chambers was running out of options to play quality minutes in the NBA. Looking to Europe, where other NBA stars went to extend their playing careers, such as Dominique Wilkins playing for Panathinaikos and Xavier McDaniel playing for Thessaloniki in Greece, and Orlando Woolridge playing for Buckler Bologna in Italy, Chambers signed a one-year contract with European powerhouse Maccabi Tel Aviv in Israel for a reported $500,000.
He really just wanted to play. He did not want to sign with a team in the NBA and perhaps play on the East Coast and do a lot of bench sitting. He wanted to get the playing time by signing with a team that will really value his contribution. Maccabi fit the bill for him. He had a fantastic season. I think in the games that he played in, the team was 22-1. He did play in the Euro League tournament, so he was playing against some of his former foes from the NBA, former stars in the NBA who were also trying to extend their playing careers in Europe. I think he averaged 18 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists for Maccabi Tel Aviv, which ironically match his NBA career numbers. And he was MVP of the team, and the team won the Israeli Premier League championship.
It's a little known chapter there, I think, that he did disappear for a year from the States to go over and play in Israel. So that video is also a good refresher of what he actually managed to achieve over there. Another great addition to your channel. In late January of 1997, Tom signed a contract to play with the Charlotte Hornets for the rest of the season. What can you tell us about his stint in Charlotte? And then we'll briefly get to where he finished his NBA career, a brief stop in Philadelphia.
Well, his time when Charlotte didn't pan out as I think he was expecting. I first found out about it by reading the sports page. I saw it as a minor headline in the NBA section that Tom Chambers was signed by the Charlotte Hornets. I was super excited because I was not expecting to ever see him in an NBA uniform again. But being on the West Coast and not having access to cable television at the time, I did not see any of those games. I would follow what he was doing in the box scores, and there wasn't a lot of playing time given to him. Dave Cowens, who was a recent guest on your show, was the coach of the Charlotte Hornets at the time, wanted to bolster his bench, and especially in the forward center positions, because Charlotte had a couple injuries in their front court, and they thought there's an opportunity to bring a seasoned veteran in who could still play. I'm not sure, based on what I've learned on my research on it, that Tom Chambers was in the best of shape coming in. Really just couldn't solidify his position on the team with Charlotte. So I think what it did ultimately was it created a fire within Tom Chambers to give it one more shot and take it really seriously, which he tried to do the following season.
He was waived by Charlotte in early April of 97, and then in August, per Basketball Reference, which is a fantastic place to get statistics and dates and whatnot from, he signed as a free agent with the Phoenix Suns, which I did not know, before Phoenix actually traded him to Philadelphia in November of 1997. So that was news to me. And then he ultimately retired from the NBA on December the 11th of 1997 after playing one game with the 76ers. What do you recall of his farewell to the NBA, Jeff?
Well, I also followed that as well, but it was through the newspapers. I was excited that he might be able to finish his career out in Phoenix. But as it turns out, Phoenix decided to trade him for a draftee of the 76ers, a European player, is a up-and-comer, and Tom went to Philadelphia. And I don't think Tom really wanted to play on the East Coast and be far away from his family. He had planted some roots in Phoenix. I think for him, it was probably a frustrating experience to be in pretty much a bench role. He was playing under Larry Brown. Larry Brown's a fantastic coach, and I think, if recollection serves me, Tom played under Larry Brown in some international either tryout or team back in the late 70s or early 80s. So there was some familiarity with Coach Larry Brown and Tom Chambers. But Chambers just had a difficult time cracking into Philadelphia's rotation, and I'm not sure he really wanted to be there either. But the footage that I was able to obtain of his time in Philadelphia really does show Tom on the bench cheering on his team, patting the players on the back when they come in for timeouts. He really wanted to make that experience a positive one. I don't think at that point his heart was in it any further. One of the questions that I've gotten in my conversations with others about why is Tom Chambers not in the Hall of Fame, and why is he not as well known as he should be after viewing the content on my channel or doing a little investigation into his career. It's something that's been on my mind for a number of years of why does he not seem to be in the conversation very often? I don't think there's any one reason for that. I would speculate that it's probably a few factors, and one of them being NBA entertainment and NBA marketing. That was headed up, I believe, by Don Sperling. It was a fairly new division that David Stern, who was the fairly young commissioner at the time, wanted to implement, was an entertainment division. So I think there were decisions made to focus on promoting certain players in the league. I'm not saying that any of those players that were focused on were undeserved of the attention, but it may have been a situation where Don Sperling, who was the head of NBA entertainment, may have been choosing players that he personally liked or thought were more marketable. And I'll make a case in point on that. In 1990, NBA came out with NBA Superstars. It was a VHS tape that featured a number of the NBA star players synced with popular music of the time. It was like a mixtape, early days of mixtape. And I was so excited to get it because I knew Tom Chambers was going to finally be on it. He had just come off of 2 stellar seasons with the Suns, 2 All-NBA selections, all those fantastic dunks and highlights. He wasn't even on the tape. And I was so disappointed. I bought the tape. He wasn't on it. And in his place, and I'm going to add Kevin Johnson to that too. Kevin Johnson was not on it either. In their place, it was Chris Mullin and Tim Hardaway. And I couldn't understand why it was those 2 players who got selected. Neither one of them were on the All-NBA team. Their team didn't even make the playoffs in 89-90. And in 88-89, Kevin Johnson and Tom Chambers defeated the Warriors 4-1. So why were those 2 players picked to be on that tape instead of Kevin Johnson and Tom Chambers, who I thought were more accomplished players at that time, statistically, winning-wise, and certainly Tom had a fantastic highlight reel of clips that could be used. I think the other factor might be the Larry Bird factor. This is just a personal speculation. It seemed like in the 1980s, even into the early 90s, if you were a tall or a big white scoring player, you'd ultimately get compared by the broadcasters to Larry Bird. And I think it was an incredibly unfair comparison because Larry Bird is a savant, one of the most gifted players in the history of the game, a complete package. There is going to be no other player that you can realistically compare to Larry Bird. You could mention Magic Johnson, but to put Tom Chambers or any other player against Larry Bird was automatically unfair. And I've seen that happen so many times when Tom Chambers is being talked about. Tom Chambers was a scorer. He was James Worthy with a jump shot. He was a slasher, a driver, a guy that can put up big numbers on the fast break, that could take it out to the 3-point. He was not Larry Bird. And I felt that maybe have hurt Tom Chambers a bit, constantly being overshadowed by Bird. And then maybe throw in playing on a couple of mediocre teams, as the San Diego Clippers for a few years in the early days of the Sonics. Those would be my speculations of why I think Tom has not been consistently in a conversation. It's one of the game's greats or nominated prior to me doing it for the Hall of Fame.
That's a great, apt comparison. James Worthy and Tom Chambers, much more realistic comparison than, as you said, to a savant like Larry Bird. On a side note, that NBA Superstars tape, I mail ordered that tape from the USA. I was that excited Probably took 2 or 3 weeks, maybe longer, to arrive. When I went to play it in the VCR here, it was in the USA format, the NTSC format, and we only had PAL format VCR here in Australia. So I could hear the audio, the music clips, but I couldn't see any of the footage. It was all scrambled, and I was absolutely distraught that I couldn't get to play it. It took another 2 or 3 years before I had access to a NTSC player to be able to play it back here in Australia. But that's just a little side note there. It's just been fascinating to talk about Tom's incredible career. Anybody listening at this stage of the conversation who hasn't already subscribed to the channel must do so. Search for TC, the letters TC for Tom Chambers, TC24 on YouTube, and you'll find Jeff's great channel. It deserves tens of thousands of subscribers. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Jeff, before we do put a bow on the conversation? And thanks again for being a fantastic guest and sharing your journey following Tom's career on the conversation today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'd like to add that my channel is non-monetized. Nothing on that channel is monetized. I do it because I love doing it. It's never been about me. I never wanted to do this to make money or to get recognition for myself. It's all about my love of the game and sharing what I saw in my favorite player, who is Tom Chambers, and hoping I can move the needle just a bit by sharing what I saw in him as a player and just be an advocate for him to be in that conversation, because I think he deserves to be in that conversation as one of the game's greats and certainly as a candidate for the Hall of Fame.
Beautifully said.
And I've got some great content planned for 2022. I've got a continuation of the Greatest Games series, so I'm trying to put out games as frequently as possible, hopefully on a weekly basis. I've got a brand new Greatest Dunks mixtape coming. It's already in the works. It's going to access a larger selection of dunks that have not been seen since their original broadcast. I think I can say this right now. Tom Chambers High School, Fairview High School in Boulder, Colorado, is retiring his high school jersey on January 25th, and I will be there, and I will put a video out on the channel about that event. There are a couple other big events planned for Tom Chambers in the next couple of months, but they're not officially announced, and I don't think I should be announcing them here, but stay tuned because I will have those big events covered on the channel when they do happen.
Fantastic. So watch this space. Will Tom be in attendance at that high school jersey retirement?
Yes, he has confirmed he'll be there. I will be there. I hope to be able to record it on my recording device, but I believe the local media in Denver and Boulder are also going to be covering it, so it should be available online, but I will produce a video on it when I have all that material.
That's great. I'm excited for you as well to meet up with Tom there, and that's only a few weeks away as you record this conversation. That's exciting news, Jeff. We might get you back on maybe later in the year when we might know a bit more detail about the impending Hall of Fame inductions, and also once some of these possible events have taken place. So thanks again, mate, for coming onto the show. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you today.
Oh, thank you so much, Adam. It's always fun to be able to talk about Tom Chambers, and thank you for taking an interest in the work that I'm doing. I'm just a guy here doing his thing, and it's so cool for me to see the fruits of all this labor. And again, it's a labor of love. I'm not doing this for any other reason but because I love it.
Thanks for listening. I welcome your interaction with the show. Tap the microphone icon on my website to send me a voicemail. You can suggest discussion topics or guests you'd like to hear conversations with. Worldwide, the show has 189 ratings on Apple Podcasts with an average of 4.9 stars, with 100 reviews across all providers. I will read the 100th review in the next In All Airness episode, as I don't have it handy at the moment. Thanks for your continued support. If you add a review, I'd love to read it out on a future episode. Your ratings and reviews are one of the best ways to support the podcast. If you enjoy the show, please tell your basketball-loving friends about it. Word-of-mouth recommendations are truly worth their weight in gold. Stay up to date with my podcasts and subscribe to my free NBA history newsletter. You'll receive exclusive details on upcoming episodes, future guests to appear on the show, and more. Sign up via my website or simply email me inallairness@gmail.com. You can follow my show in various ways. Search In All Airness, 3 words, on your listening app of choice. The show is available on most platforms. Check the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with a great range of guests. My Instagram and Twitter handle is @In All Airness. Search In All Airness on YouTube and Facebook too. Join me next time for another edition of the show.